Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Terry Gerton. I'm president of the National Academy of Public Administration, and I am delighted to welcome you all to an exciting event. You know, a consistent theme among those of us who advocate for improved government processes is transparency, especially when it comes to data. Reliable, accessible data on government operations is essential. It's the basic tool of good policy analysis and assessment, of research and of reporting, so that people can understand better how their government works and whether it's effective. But just making reliable data accessible is not enough. That data needs to be presented in a way that invites engagement and analysis, facilitates assessment, and that informs the public. So today, the United States Department of the Treasury and the National Academy of Public Administration are partnering to share with you two new sources of data that we believe meet these criteria. We hope that by the end of today's presentation, you'll find these tools as promising as we do, and that you'll share them with your colleagues and feel free and empowered to start using them in your own work. I do invite you as we go along to submit your questions using the Q&A feature on your screen. We'll take time after each presentation to address as many of your questions as we can. And now I am very pleased to introduce Amy Edwards. Amy is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Accounting Policy and Financial Transparency at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. She's also a Fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration. Amy, thanks so much for kicking off today's webinar.
Great. Thank you, Terry. And thanks for having and partnering with us on this, having us here today to share more about our work. As you mentioned, I lead the federal financial transparency work at Treasury, and I'm very pleased to be here with you today and see so many people interested in learning more about our journey to expand the use of open data and financial information, to get more value out of all this data that we have. Financial transparency is really core to Treasury's mission. Since we issued the first Treasury statement in 1789, we've been on a journey to provide that transparency and those disclosures to the public to better understand how your federal dollars are spent. And so over the past few years, we've accelerated our journey on transparency, and we've adopted agile and user-centered design practices that I think have really accelerated this work in some meaningful ways. And so we're going to share with you some of that today. My colleague Linnea Powell is going to walk you through in great detail one of our latest products. But I thought before we dove into that, I would start by sharing a little bit of background information on this journey we've been on for the last few years, and hit on some of the key things you were just mentioning, Terry, which are how are we focusing on getting data that's useful to those who want to use it across many different communities, whether that's the public, taxpayers, citizens, journalists, researchers, Congress, oversight entities. There's a very wide variety of users of all of the very valuable financial data that we have at Treasury, and we want to make it accessible and relevant. And so we've been spending a lot of time doing that. I've spoken, and there's actually been a case study written by the NAPA Agile Center for Center for Best Practices, and really trying to foster the adoption of more agile management practices across government. And I think that's a good group. I've been pleased to be a part of it. There's a case study that talks about some of our work there that you might want to check out that's related to what we're going to share with you today. As many of you may know, we started these agile practices with the adoption of and the implementation of the Data Act. And the Data Act passed in 2014. It required us to quickly disclose and connect data from all across the government on federal spending. And so, through that effort, we applied a lot of these user-centered design principles, and we found them to be quite valuable. The USA Spending site today tracks over $4 trillion of annual federal spending, and it allows you to drill in and actually see who received those funds and where those funds were directed across the country and across the globe. And so that's been a successful effort. And because we've adopted agile principles, it's allowed us to more quickly update and improve that site continuously. It's also allowed us to be more responsive to incoming requests and incoming demands. For instance, we were able to quickly pivot and start a new feature on the pandemic response and the response to the COVID spending and tracking that was required for the federal government. So we've been able to use those principles of agile and user-focused design to really accelerate our work. And so USA Spending was step one. And beyond that, there are a couple different products, one of which the latest one you're going to hear about today. But I also wanted to mention our data lab, which is a sister site to USA Spending. It's focused on providing visualizations and analysis and really designed to inspire the use of the data in different ways. And so you can see things on the data lab like America's Guide to Finance, which was designed to really give a citizen an overview of federal finance so they could understand revenues, what is spent, what the debt looks like, and the deficit for any given year. So it explains all of those concepts and allows the public to drill in and see that information for themselves. And so I think it's a very helpful guided tour as an introduction to finance and a lot of the other data that we have across Treasury. In addition, the Data Lab allows you to review our data and look at key questions that users highlighted that might be of interest to them. Things like, how much did your alma mater receive in funding from the federal government, and how much does the federal government spend in a given day? And so you can see all of these visualizations and analysis, and I think it helps to show the potential of what the value of this data. So I would encourage you to take a look at that as well. And today you're going to hear more about our latest product directly from Linnea, who is the product owner for FISCALDATA.TREASURY.GOV. And this is really a one-stop shop for federal financial data. It's focused on the users, focused on the needs of really, we call them maybe power users, those analysts who are looking for a lot of our high-value data sets, and they want to take that data and conduct analysis based off of it. So Linnea is going to talk with you today. I hope that many of you really take advantage of this new website, these new resources. Linnea and her team have been applying best management practices, trying to mature the way that we provide data to the public, and I think in a really helpful way. So you can have all of the information, all the metadata, all of the information that we have in an easy to use format that we hope you will find helpful. So with that, I will turn it over to Linnea to kind of walk you through the details of this exciting effort. And I really encourage you to check it out, provide any feedback to us. And, we're always looking to expand and improve and to make this data as helpful and as useful as possible to all of you and all the communities that want to use it. So with that, Linnea, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Amy. All right. So I'm excited to talk to you today about our new Fiscal Data website. And I thought that we'd start with a quick pop quiz to give you a taste of some of the data available on the website. So our first question is, how much did the federal government collect in revenue last month? So I'm going to wait a little bit to have you fill out this question, choose whichever one you think is correct. Okay, it looks like 40% thought it was $346 billion. And it looks like that's correct. So you can see from our website here, we are showing the trend in the last year, and there was $346 billion collected in revenue in December. And this is coming from our monthly Treasury statement. So this is one of the data sets that you can find on our website. And the next question is, what was the national debt as of December 2020? So take a second to look at your options and select whichever one you think is correct. Okay, it looks like most people said 27 trillion. Okay, so you can see the trend in the last year compared to December 2019. The national debt as of December was $27.7 trillion, and this is coming from our monthly statement of the public debt, which is one of the data sets available on the website. So that hopefully gives you just a taste of some of the information and some of the questions that you can answer from the data on our website. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just the goals of the Fiscal Data website, and then I'm going to go through and give a demo of the site itself. So Fiscal Data was launched this past summer by the Department of Treasury and the Fiscal Service to be a one-stop shop for federal financial data. What we wanted to do was really be a leader in modern data practices as part of the federal data strategy. So offering data in machine readable formats so that users can easily get that data. And our overall goal was to really make data as easy to get and as easy to understand as possible. Our mission was to inspire trust in government by providing access to federal financial data in this one easy-to-use platform. We have 24 data sets now that are available on the website, and these data sets come from the systems that perform the critical functions of accounting in our government. We also, in putting these data sets together, we focused on offering complete and comprehensive metadata for each data set. So you'll find data dictionaries that define all of the fields in each data set and descriptions for what the data set is. So that was a big part of getting these data sets, was not just offering the data, but having that metadata available to users. And then a couple of points here about what makes the Fiscal data site different from other websites. So one of our key values in designing this website was to focus on human-centered design and usability. So we talked to over 100 users of other government or financial data websites to see what were the key features that they wanted in a website, what would make their work easier. And we made sure that we really focused on designing something that would work for people. Another key component was offering machine readable data downloads. So as opposed to offering, a PDF, which you might often see on some websites where you have to go and copy and paste the data and then input that into your own spreadsheet, we wanted to make sure that we were offering the data directly in an easy to use format so that we could save user steps and help people to really jump into their own analysis as quickly as possible. And then another key part of the site is offering easily accessible APIs. So all of our data sets have APIs that you can use if you'd like to access the data in that way. And we also have extensive documentation on how you could use that. So I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to switch to the website itself. So here you can see our homepage for Fiscal data. We have this image here that shows some of the key content and features of the site. And then down here, you can also see, we have multiple paths to go to our search page. And then in the middle here, we have this inside Fiscal data section. So the goal of this section of the website was to really call out some of the high-level questions that we thought users would be interested in and that can be answered within the data that we offer on the website. So we did some of these in the pop quiz already, but you can see, for example, how has the average interest rate on federal debt changed over time? That's something that you can answer from our average interest rates on US Treasury securities data set. So you can view that data set and see where that information is sourced. And then you can also see here what the actual answer is and see the trend in the past year. And then we have a couple more high-level questions like that, such as how much does the federal government collect in revenue each month, which we did in the pop quiz. I think people did really well on that one. And you can see which data sets this information is coming from, and then go and view that data set in more detail. So the goal here, again, was just to answer some of those high-level questions and show people some of the insights and trends that you can gather from the website. And then down here at the bottom of the homepage, we are highlighting some of the key features of the website and some of the goals of creating the site. So number one was just machine readable data, making sure that we're offering data in an easy to use format. So you'll see that we offer all of the data sets as CSVs, and so you can easily download that and start your own analysis. We also wanted to offer as much historical and current data as possible. So it was important that we weren't just offering data that was a point in time, but we wanted to offer all of the historical data that we could so that you could do a trend analysis and have a lot of data to work with. We also wanted to offer comprehensive metadata and detailed data dictionaries so that you could understand what the data set is, you could understand what each field means, and know when the data would be updated. So the goal there was to make it as easy to use and understand the data as possible. And then another key part of the site, which I'll walk through in a bit, are adjustable data previews. So this allows you to do a bit of your own analysis before you even download the data. So you can see what some of the trends look like in the data and what the table download will look like. And you can do that all within the website itself. And then the APIs, as I mentioned, we have extensive documentation about how you can access our data and the different parameters that you can apply. So now I'm going to move to our dataset search page, which is really the heart of the site. So as I mentioned before, a key focus here was human-centered design. And so we designed this page by talking to people and asking what were the most important filters that you'd like, or better, how would you like to be able to find data and what fields are key to you? So there were a couple of things that we heard. One was that people expect to be able to do a text search similar to Google. So we have that capability here if you want to search by a term. The other thing that we heard was really important was that users wanted to be able to search by date in a variety of ways. And so we have a couple of different filters here that deal with dates. We can search by the last updated. So some of our data sets, 5 of the 24 data sets on the website are updated every day. So in the last 24 hours, if you want the most current data, you could filter for those data sets. And then you could look at what's been updated in the past month or the past year and filter them in that way. We also heard that users would like to filter by the start date of the data set. So essentially how far back the data goes. One thing that I think is really neat is that one of the data sets actually goes all the way back to 1790. So, if you only want to do analyses of, more than 200 years of data, we've got that for you right here. And then you can see several of the data sets go back to the 90s and so on. So you can filter by that. We also have this time range filter. So this allows you to enter a start date and an end date, which you might be familiar with from other websites. So those are some of the date filters that we heard were important. You can also filter by the dataset publisher. So as we said, these data sets are coming from a variety of systems from our bureau. So you can filter by the area that's publishing the data set. And then all of our data sets are offered in these machine readable formats. But we heard from users that it was important to know that you're going to be able to download a CSV of that data set as opposed to a PDF. And so you can filter by the file type if you'd like. One of the other key filters that we found was really important in user testing was these topics at the top here. So some of these data set titles might not be as easily understandable as the topics up here. So we tried to pull out some high-level terms that would allow people to easily narrow down the data sets. So you can see we have 24 total data sets. I can filter by debt to see which of the data sets are related to debt. So now we're down to 16 here. And you can also see that each of our data sets is represented by a tile or a card here. And so we have the same type of information or fields for each data set. So it's a consistent format, but each data set has the title, the description, the date range of the data set, how often it's updated, when it was last updated, and then highlighting the formats in the data dictionary. So each one of the data sets has that information called out on these cards. So I'm going to go and check out one of these data sets. So I'll click on debt to the penny. This is one of our most popular data sets. You can see up here, this is our data set detail page. So each of these pages follows the same format, but obviously has different information depending on the data set. So we have some of that key metadata. This data set goes back to 1993. It's updated every day. So last updated yesterday. You can see a short description. This is the total debt of the US government reported daily. And then down here, we have some more metadata. We have the long form description. We have the data dictionary, so you can see every single field name, what the description is or definition for that field. We also have additional metadata here, where you can see some of what was on the search page, how often it's updated, what part of our bureau publishes that data. One of the most unique parts of our site is that we have this notes and known limitations section. So this is where we can put anything that we think users might want to know that might not be immediately obvious in the data. So one thing that's really critical about this data set in particular is the debt to the penny was originally reported yearly, from 97 to 2001, and then monthly in the early 2000s, and then now daily since 2005. So that's something where we want to call that out for users so that they don't feel like there's a gap in the data and they're confused why that is. So any kind of notes that we think would be helpful, we're including in this area. You can also see up here at the top, we have a pretty extensive page here. So we have a navigation where you can skip down to different sections of the site. So we also have this preview and download area of the site. For each data set, you can filter by the last 5 years. You can look at a 10-year sample. You can look at all of the data that we have for that data set, or you could look at just the past year. You can also download the data in different formats. So CSV, JSON, or XML, you can download that right here. You can also download the data dictionary itself. So similar to what I highlighted up at the top of the page, you can, if you want to work offline, you could just download this data dictionary and save that to be able to work with it for your analysis. And then here in the table, we have a preview of what that data is going to look like. So this is something that we heard was really important to people. We heard in user testing that people often felt like they had to download the data to figure out what was in the data. So we wanted to make it clear, this is what the debt to the penny data set is, and this is what it looks like, so that users know exactly what they're getting when they click that download button. And then for many of our data sets, we also offer a chart preview. So you can look and see a trend for the data set over the last 5 years, since that's what I've selected here. And you can hover over and see the exact values on these different fields over time. So this gives you, a quick idea if you wanted to do your own analysis. This is what the data is going to look like if you were to chart it. And then here in our API quick guide, we're offering some details about this data set, such as the endpoint and the full URL if you wanted to access it via API. We have quite a bit of information here, so you can expand the page to learn more about some of the parameters that you could apply. And we also have an example request and response, so you can hopefully get started using the API that way. And then here at the bottom of the page, we have related data sets, which is really what we wanted to do here was encourage people to browse the site and go and explore other data sets. So what you can do here, similar to an e-commerce website, you can click on one of these data sets and go to that data set detail page. So now here we're on the daily treasury statement page. You can see we have the same format with metadata up at the top, and you can see some more of that metadata, and then you can skip down to the preview and download section for that data set. One other thing I'll highlight is just our API documentation. So we have that API quick guide, and we also have some more extensive API documentation to try to answer any questions that you may have, including our list of endpoints. If you wanted to just go and access directly through here, you can see that information in this API documentation section. And then one other thing that I'll highlight, Amy mentioned this as well, we have a couple other sites that are run by the Office of the Chief Data Officer at Fiscal Service, and that is the USA Spending website and the Data Lab site. These are both great websites to explore federal spending data in depth, and USA Spending is the real source to be able to see all of that in one place. You can also access the Data Lab, where we have different stories and visualizations about that data. So I'm going to stop there and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Linnea. Great presentation. We do have some questions in the chat. The first one asks about the underlying technology for fiscal data. Are you using Socrata, CCAN, or something else?
So we're not using Socrata or CCAN. We built the site ourselves. It's Gatsby based. I don't know if people are familiar with that. So we had our own team using agile methodologies, which Amy alluded to as well. And so we really built the site from scratch.
Okay, thanks. And so here's another one. Do you have maturity data on the federal debt instruments that would allow an analyst to calculate the average maturity of the national debt?
I don't think that we have that information right now, but we are looking to add more data sets. So that's something we can look into adding.
Well, in fact, the very next question asks that. How many data sets have been added since launch, and what's next for the site?
Sure. So we started with 18 data sets when we launched in July, and we're now up to 24, and we have a couple more data sets that should be added in the next couple of months. We're actually looking at all of the public-facing data that the Bureau has, and our goal is to add all of that data to this website over time. So I think it could easily double in size, and we hope to have all of that information available on fiscal data.
So cool. Will you be adding any additional features to the site that people should be looking forward to?
Sure. So some of the things that we're looking to add next would be more data sets, as I said. We think that's really critical. But then we're also looking to add more educational or topical information. So we'd like to be able to explain some of the concepts of debt or revenue or spending. And so we're looking to add more of that information to the website. And we're also looking to expand some of the high-level questions that we answer. So there's a lot of good information sort of buried in the data sets, and we want to pull that out and make that readily available. So as Amy mentioned, we really targeted data analysts for this initial site launch, and now we're going to be looking to expand our site to a broader audience and try to answer more of those general questions.
Right. So here's somebody who's obviously spent some time on the data sites. Funding account is one way to cross-reference USA spending data and Treasury data. So do the data sites here include the funding accounts?
Not sure. I think our monthly Treasury statement might have some of that information, but you can also go and look at the USA spending site to see they have the federal account information profiles available there.
Great. So here's a question. Given the recent government cybersecurity challenges, are you at all concerned that people who access data from this site put their own systems at risk?
I don't have any reason to believe that. We're obviously very focused on our security, and all of this data is made open by default. But we're obviously monitoring that closely.
Okay. And if somebody wants to find spending data, is that all on USA Spending, or is there a cross of spending data and fiscal data on the fiscal data site?
That's a great question. So I would say it overlaps on both sites. So we have some of the high-level spending information in the monthly Treasury statement or the monthly statement of public debt. And that's also highlighted in your Guide to America's Finances, which Amy mentioned, that's on the Data Lab website. But if you want to see the most granular view, you would want to go to USA Spending, because that's where you can see each individual award. So there's a lot more detailed information on USA Spending.
Got it. So Linnea, what was the biggest challenge or biggest challenges that you all faced in building the site?
Yes. So I would say, we wanted to really build the site with users in mind. And so we needed to talk to people. So we talked to over 100 people. That was obviously really hard to do, especially when a lot of that work was done during a pandemic. So we had to do a lot of that virtually. But it was really important that we talk to actual people and not just build the website based on what we thought might be best. So I think the user research part was really critical. The other key challenge was just assembling all of that metadata. So making sure that we had a data dictionary for every data set and making sure that we had consistent information about when it is updated and descriptions for the data sets. So we worked with people across the fiscal service to put all of that together. And that was definitely a big effort from our entire bureau.
And so how did that user research go? What were the big things that you found when you were doing that user-centered research?
Yeah, so some of the things we found were just that metadata was really critical. People who used other websites sometimes felt like they didn't know what data they were working with, or they weren't sure what some of the fields meant, and they didn't know where to go for that information. So that's why we really focused on metadata. We also built out that preview section based on our user research, because as I said before, a lot of people felt like they had to download information to be able to understand what was in it. And so we wanted to put that up front and make sure that people could get that without having to go to the download right away. And then a lot of our search page was built based on the filters that we learned about from users. So we made sure that all of the filters were things that were critical and that actual people requested.
Do you have any methodology documentation detailing the user research that folks could reference in their own extensions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm sure I could put together something high level. I have a lot of detailed notes that I'm not sure I could share, but I could share some of the high level steps that we went through.
Okay. And here's a good question. Is all of this data accessible for free?
Yes.
Good question, short answer. Here's a question about the data dictionaries. Will you be bringing any of this design style with the metadata and other features to USA Spending? Would be especially helpful for the bulk files on USA Spending.
Yeah, that's a good comment. I know that USA Spending has the glossary, but maybe there's something that we could do that's more in depth. So I would definitely take a note on that and see, where we can work that in. That's a great comment.
All right, so let's see. Your site looks like a model for others to emulate. This is great work. What's your vision for where the platform is headed?
Yeah, so thank you very much. We're really proud of it. We had a great team that put it together. Our vision, like I said, is just to really be a one-stop shop for all of this financial data. And I think we have a lot of the detailed information available right now. And what we're going to be, our future vision is to add more of those insights that people can easily pull out and access. So that's where we're going to be adding some more general, high-level information to make sure that we're approachable for all types of users.
Do you have details on the policies that guided or required the development of fiscal data?
Sure. So I would say the Evidence Act encouraged a lot of the principles that we're following with offering machine readable data and making sure that that's available and trying to make the data understandable. So we're really guided by the Evidence Act and the federal data strategy work that's been done. A lot of those are recommendations that we're trying to get ahead of and really be leaders in. So I would say those were the guidance that really led us to build this site.
And I think, too, the case study that Amy mentioned about Agile, and you talked about it, we've posted the link to that Agile case study in the chat for folks to take a look at. And the whole approach to design, I think, is really remarkable. Mm-hmm. Here's a question that wants to know how much traffic you've got on the site since you launched it.
Yeah, so we've increased, I can't remember the exact number, but I know we've increased our audience by about 40% since we've launched the site. So I think we're really trying to get the word out. I think we have tens of thousands of users each month. So we're really trying to grow that user base as well.
And will USAspending.gov remain conceptually independent, or will there eventually be a single portal that brings all of this information together and a common set of APIs? Yeah,
that's a good question. So USA Spending, is part of legislation. And so I think it will always be its own website, but we are looking at ways that we can better integrate the two sites. So we're considering, tying our insights so you can see the connections. I think we got a lot of questions about that today. So that's, good and shows that that's probably the right direction. So we're going to work on trying to make those connections more clear and available on our websites, but I think they will remain as two distinct websites.
All right, so here's somebody that wants to circle back to the question about methodology documentation. Will that be posted on the site when it's ready, or what will the means be of getting that information out to folks?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can go and look at our About Us section to see if we have any of those details there already. But if not, I'm happy to send out some more information.
Okay. And speaking of more information, would you be able to share in the chat either a press point of contact or someone that can handle follow-up questions on
Sure, I can do that.
All right, so we'll follow up with that. Okay, well, it looks like we've gotten through all the questions. That was a long list. And so, right. Lene, I really appreciate you sharing this with us and for all the folks who dropped questions into the chat.
Okay, thanks so much. Definitely go check out the site.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to begin part 2 of this presentation, and I'm going to introduce 2 more Academy Fellows to you. Jamie Boex is a Senior Fellow at the Duke Center for International Development, and Dr. John Bartle is Dean of the College of Public Affairs and Community Service at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Together, they have recreated an important set of public administration data that had fallen by the wayside since the U.S. Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations was shuttered in 1995. So John and Jamie will share with you the Academy's new data resource, federalism.us. Jamie, over to you.
Thanks so much, Terry, for that introduction. Before I launch in, let me share that what I'm about to present is a work in progress of NAPA Standing Panel on Intergovernmental Systems, and is the work of a number of fellows that are working together under this panel. And really the attempt here is, as part of the Academy's broader ambition to address the country's grand challenges in public administration, for the standing panel to express the view that most, if not all, of the country's grand challenges really require not only a federal response, but in fact require intergovernmental and evidence-based solutions. Linnea just shared with us an excellent presentation of U.S. Treasury's efforts to make its own data readily available from the federal level. And I think the Academy's efforts complement the Treasury's efforts by highlighting that in many areas of spending, it is not just the federal government that spends in different sectors or in different functional areas. And in fact, that federal, state, and local governments contribute to achieve specific policy objectives across a wide range of public sector challenges. The slide in front of you highlights that other than in the areas of defense and international affairs, that across a wide range of spending areas and areas of public policy challenge, such as equitable access to education or transportation infrastructure or environmental policy, it is not only the federal government, but also state and local governments that have a very important role to play. So there is a need not just to bring out the federal level data, but also do the same thing for state and local governments. Now, Terry, you mentioned in your opening remarks that for those who have been around for a while, we might remember that ACIR used to play an important role in discussions around fiscal federalism in the U.S. For those who don't know, until 1995, the U.S. Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations really convened the community of practice around federalism and intergovernmental relations in the U.S., including through an annual publication of a data book called Significant Features of Fiscal Federalism that some of us may remember. Unfortunately, ACIR was abolished in 1996 due to budget cuts. And so for the past 25 years, despite the fact that there has been an explosion in big data, there has not been an organization that has brought together data on different aspects of intergovernmental systems in a single portal or in an accessible manner. For instance, just to illustrate, there is still data available and analysis available on federal and intergovernmental issues, but the data and the information is scattered across different websites. This slide here is an example from the Tax Foundation showing state and local tax collections across the US. In many ways, this example is typical because due to the fact that data is harder to access than before, the analysis is done at the state level based on state averages rather than drilling down further to the local level. So for instance, if you look at this map, you will see that New York State has very high state and local taxes, but it doesn't really reveal whether or not this is due to New York City or whether or not this is a statewide phenomenon. So it would be much nicer to do this kind of analysis not only at the state level, but be able to drill down to the local level. And currently the data available to drill down is not easily accessible. In fact, it's generally true that consistent data on intergovernmental finances are hard to find, especially disaggregated below the state level. And as anyone would know who has tried to use the public use files or the individual unit files of the Census of Government Finance, it takes a considerable amount of effort and energy to simply get to the point where you can use the available data. As Linnea mentioned earlier with respect to federal data, if it's hard to access data, and this is true at the state and local level as it is at the federal level, if it's hard to access the data, this will reduce the quantity and quality of research that can be done with the data. This is where the National Academy of Public Administration comes in. The Academy has a congressional mandate, among others, to advise on the relationship of federal, state, regional, and local governments, and to increase public officials, citizens, and scholars' understanding of the requirements and opportunities for sound governance and how these can be effectively met. With this in mind, in response to the perceived data gap, a number of Academy Fellows, including John Bartle, Barry Van Laer, and others, in addition to research assistance provided by the University of Nebraska-Omaha, we pulled together FEDERALISM.US in the past year, including an online new data book with a title, Significant Features of American Federalism, as a nod to the precursor. And the intent of this website is not to create new data sets or to pull together new data, but rather to pull together data from existing sources and present them in an accessible format to lower the threshold for policy analysis on intergovernmental issues. And John will show this in a moment. You will see from the site we faced many of the same challenges that the U.S. Treasury did in pulling together its data platform. And we've come up with some somewhat different solutions, but in many cases are hoping to, again, lower the threshold for making sure this data is accessible to users. With that, let me stop sharing my screen and let me ask John to share the website live.
Well, thank you, Jamie. Hello to everybody. So this is federalism.us. It's the website. The URL is easy to remember. And there's a lot of good stuff here. I'm going to focus on data, but Intergovernmental Matters is a blog and has a variety of interesting kind of magazine type articles there that are relevant to federalism. So some other stuff that's good to look at, but I know it's a data symposium, so I thought I'd focus on that. We have 4 broad categories for the data: institutional features of federalism, governance features, administrative features, and then fiscal features. Again, since we're focused on fiscal data, I'm going to focus on the 4th one. And I think in some ways the more interesting one is the, at least an interesting one is the expenditure information. Again, in the interest of time, I'm going to go pretty quickly here. But if you go to, what I'm going to show you is this 4.2.3. I've got the table pulled up here. So this is, of course, an Excel table. If you want to be able to download it, you can. You can save it and so forth. So that, again, the whole idea is to get the information in your hands. This is a good example. It shows you we have the data. This is state and local government expenditures by function and subfunction. And we got it from 92 to 2017. So, a good time series there. Again, I'm imagining that somebody might be interested in, for example, education or transportation. And then that data is there. You can look at trends. You can look at, which increased faster. So, for example, if I want to know in transportation, are we spending more on highways compared to air transportation, compared to other modes of transportation? Then we can look at that. And then we have, of course, the source data where that's coming from. So again, you can download this and use it in a variety of ways to analyze it the way you want to do charts and diagrams as well. Then to go back a bit, that is what you just saw was the state and local expenditures. If you wanted that broken down by state, you can do that. So if you want to focus on your state and that same data by state, then you can do that. And then if you want state only, you can do that. If you want local only, you can do that as well. So again, I'm not going to open up all these different spreadsheets, but I think you get the idea. And again, the point is that it's in Excel. It's we provide the documentation, the background information, where it's coming from, what the source data is. Of course, like all good research, you ask one question and it leads to, you ask a question, you answer it, and that leads to more questions, which is a good thing. So we're hoping that this provides researchers, analysts, legislators, staff with the information that they want, at least to some level. Obviously, if you want to go deeper, if you want to know, deeply about your state, then you probably need to go more directly to those sources. But again, we tell you where it's coming from, so you can go to, for example, that data that we saw is from the Census Bureau, and of course there you can go to their website. But what we wanted to do was, again, to move out a bit here, just to have a landing place for data on federalism for a broad public, information that we think is useful to people, to make this as helpful as possible. And again, since it's downloadable and all that, then make it as accessible as possible. We have about 70 data tables now. They'll continue to be updated as they go forward, as new information comes out. And then we'll also add new tables as we go forward. And we would like feedback on that. If there's gaps that you think are important that need to be added, we'd certainly be receptive to that. And then I did want to show you some of the data visualization that we have available. This is under this American Federalism 101, and we did do some data visualization. So visualizing a variety of different areas, and so here we really have a bunch of different. We did dig down and do a fair amount of stuff. So this is, for example, county median household income, own source, per capita own source, local revenue, and so on. The one I'm going to show you is the local expenditures per school-age child. This is where, the nerd in me, of course, comes out. If you look at, this is the statewide averages, and this is kind of going to Jamie's point earlier. If you look at the average for each state, for example, if you look at Texas, you say, well, Texas looks kind of average, and statewide it is, but Texas is a big state. And if you look in detail, this is by county area, you see the darker is the higher spending per school-age child, and the lighter is the lower. So you see a lot of variation in Texas, and you can see it's regional, that the eastern part is lower and the western part is higher. That, of course, then, if you're like me, it makes you think, I wonder what's going on there. And then you can dig into that. Here's an interesting one I saw too. South Dakota is significantly smaller than the states it neighbors, significantly lower in expenditures per school-age child. Well, why is that? Is that because certain areas of South Dakota are particularly hot, particularly low? And you see the answer. I mean, there's variation in the state, and then comparing it to the other states. So what we've tried to do then is draw people in, draw in the data, draw in the information, so you can see what's of interest. And again, we have that for a variety of different areas. I just showed you the education spending, and we have a variety of different other areas. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I think that's the main points I wanted to make. So Terry?
Thanks, John and Jamie. We do have some questions coming in, and I think these are going to relate generally, at least initially, to questions about what comes next. So here's a question. Did you consider including the census state tax collections data, which is more timely, but not as comprehensive?
Let's see. I don't remember talking about that one, Jamie. I mean, I think with any of these things, again, we started from nowhere, about 9 months ago now. And so I think that's the question, is what sorts of things do we move to next? Jamie, your thoughts on that?
Sure. No, exactly. I think it's important to note that this is really a work in progress. And what we've tried to do is put online the tables that we thought were the most relevant. One next step would be to consider what other sources would be more relevant. And among that would be, for instance, the annual state level data. What we're trying to do is to prioritize making sure that we are able to properly maintain the data that we put online. This is essentially a volunteer effort at this stage. So we are looking towards making sure that we get the lowest hanging fruit and something that we are able to sustain.
Right, thanks. are there major differences between the data shown here and the data used by the Bureau of Economic Analysis to calculate GDP?
Yeah, there are differences. I mean, the census data is more granular, more by state and local. We do also provide, I didn't get into it, but we made a fair amount of effort to present county level data so that you could have information where it would show for a given county all the local governmental spending in that area. BEA does not get anywhere near into that level of detail, so that's an important difference there.
Thanks, John. Here's an interesting question. Much of this data is only collected once every 5 years because of the complexity of the data collection process. So do you think that state and local governments should follow the federal government's lead by providing machine-readable data that's then easier to aggregate and compare?
That's a Jamie question.
I just thought that would be a John question. No, I indeed think that that is really one of the challenges coming up. In many cases, state level data is reported to federal agencies and then reported in aggregate. I am thinking, for instance, about highway data, which is available in national total and broken down by state, but not by county. So I think there's a lot more to be done for state and local reporting to the federal level and the standardization of data. If we speak specifically to the Census of Government Finance data, the coding system that the Census of Government used has been consistently used for several decades, I believe 30 or 40 years or more. If I compare that to the chart of accounts and the reporting codes that are used in countries around the world, our efforts are outdated. So I think with the availability of data reporting tools, there's a lot to be done in the coming years to standardize reporting that will facilitate more timely and more systematic reporting, even though we're a federal country and understandably are working across 50 different systems.
But if I could add briefly to that, I mean, the ability to have that time series from the census data is really important. It means that things are categorized in the same way from one year to the next. If there's a change, then it's noted, so you know what you have. So you're comparing apples to apples over the long term, and I think that is one of the things that is really important. I mean, we want data that has that integrity, that is reliable, and with one of the problems that has happened is since ACIR left, then there's great data out there, but it's not necessarily collected on a consistent basis over the long term. And I mean, Census Bureau is great at that, and that's one of their great virtues. There certainly are other data sets that go into more detail than Census, but sometimes, you know, they're collected by other organizations. They do a great job for 5-10 years, and then it disappears. So that's one of the things that we thought was important in curating the information.
Thanks, John. So here's a question, it may be a John or a Jamie question. What are the differences between Federalism US and the Book of States published by the Council on State Governments?
I'm happy to take a crack at that. The Book of States focuses very much on state level information. And as a matter of fact, as we mentioned, our platform pools data from different sources, including the Book of States. So for instance, on state level governance indicators, the Book of States is an excellent source of information and data. What the Book of States does not offer, or some other sites do not offer, is information on local level relationships. And so again, what we are trying to do is pull from sources such as the Book of the States, such as the Census of Government Finance, Census of Population. The Bureau of Economic Analysis in recent years has done actually a great job disaggregating county level GDP, but we're pulling it all together so that someone interested can readily see different data sets that one might link. For instance, in response to COVID, you might want to know about unemployment at the county level, about GDP patterns at the county level, about local government finance at the county level. So again, what we've tried to do is pull together data from different sources in order to lower the threshold to do research with it. I think that is really the key to our platform.
Yeah, and I would say we focused on, in the presentation, I focused on the fiscal data, because that's my assumption is what most people here are most interested in. But we do have a variety of other information, characteristics of governmental jurisdictions, so poverty estimates, labor force, household income. We have a whole section on governance features, and that looks at political representation, for example. So if you want to know how many female state legislators there are by state, we have that. So, you know, it's not just fiscal data, and it's not just, you know, numerical data. We also have, for example, state constitutions and charters that are there. So, you know, there's 70 tables there. There's a lot of information. So I think it's, I'm hoping that it's the kind of thing that many of those listening will just enjoy kind of bumping around in and seeing what's there. And you know, because I think we did try to make it broadly useful for those of you who do remember significant features of fiscal federalism. You know, it was more than just tables of data. It was a variety of information about state and local governance.
So John, one other question here in the queue. As the dean at a university focused on public administration, what kind of research do you think this data helps enable?
Well, I think it's both academic and applied. I mean, I think any good researcher in this area needs to know about this data source, this website, and to know about the data. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, depending on how deeply one goes, you might go beyond this to the underlying data from the Census Bureau or wherever. But also, I do a lot of work with our state legislature here in Nebraska, and what I've seen is the importance of the data visualization. I mean, just like the educational spending chart I showed you, I've seen charts like that used on the floor of the Nebraska State Legislature, and one legislator showing it to another, saying, look at what's going on here, and seeing that have an effect. We all know that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a really good picture is probably worth about 10,000 or 100,000 data points. And so I think that is maybe one of the things that I hope people do is, you know, download the stuff, get the Excel spreadsheet, start working with it, and then really make it pop, really make it, with all the tools that we have available to us for data analysis, there's a unlimited number of ways that you can present this data. So, I mean, I think that's really the long-term potential. And the point is then we're all working off of a credible set of data. People understand where it's coming from. As I mentioned earlier, you've got the longevity of the Census Bureau's information and the other sources that we pull from, the Book of the States, whatever. And then that's credible data that is really, I think, important for any consumer of data, whether it be the researcher or just an interested citizen.
Thanks, John. And Jamie, one last question for you. What are you expecting in terms of next steps beyond 70 tables? What data will you be looking to add?
I think that will depend a lot on the feedback we receive. As John mentioned, right now we have 4 categories of data. I think if anything, one area that might be interesting to add would be areas that show the performance of the public sector. We focus a lot on process, public administration, public finance, public governance. What the website does not provide readily is breakdowns of some outcome indicators. For instance, educational achievement at the local level across the country, healthcare spending across the country, transport infrastructure indicators, where again, scratching below the surface and getting more granular data would help allow explanations across why are we seeing more highways in certain places than others, or where is infrastructure need greater, how does the expenditure pattern of education that John just pointed out, how does that relate to better outcomes, or does it? So that would definitely be an area of interest in line with the grand challenges that the Academy is pursuing. But we're very, very open. We are interested in the notion that national challenges have intergovernmental solutions and are driven by what others in the community of practice believe would be relevant. So we look forward to hearing from everyone about their suggestions and ideas.
Well, thanks to both of you. I know that you've done a tremendous amount of work to make this a reality, and I think we've exhausted the questions for now, but we'll come back to it. So I want to thank you, both John and Jamie, for giving us that presentation on federalism.us. So now we've looked at two brand new tools. We've looked at fiscal data and we've looked at federalism that put government data directly in the hands of the public. But as I said at the beginning of today's webinar, the real value of data is that it can help us understand how government is working. And sometimes the way we best understand that is through stories. So joining me now is Tom Shoup, the Executive Vice President and Editor-in-Chief at Government Executive Media Group and an Academy Fellow. So Tom, we've talked about two sets of data here that might blow the socks off of us policy wonks and researchers, but these topics probably are a little esoteric to a lot of people. So from your experience as a journalist, what does it take to get people interested in these kinds of details about how our government system works?
First of all, I guess I'm maybe a wonk myself because my socks are metaphorically on the floor. It's a little chilly today for them to actually be knocked off. But both of these efforts, I'm kind of blown away by the rich sources of data that are being made available. And I think there are many, many stories to be told in there that would generate a lot of interest among the general public. And as a journalist, I would say to John's point, a picture is worth 1,000 words. 1,000 words is also worth 1,000 words. Actually, in the news business, 500 words is worth 1,000 words. And this gives people the opportunity to do two things. One, for researchers to pour through this data and provide some insights, which can then be filtered down through journalists to the public. But it also provides an opportunity for people to explore the data on their own. And the Treasury, the fiscal data site, is really impressive to me in that regard, in the sense that it both pre-packages information in an easy to digest way and enables people to do really robust research. And I think that unlocking that combination is really what gets you to where you can really have an impact with the data.
So, in our connected world today, data is everywhere. So how would you expect people to engage with this data? And are there things that both Treasury and NAPA can be thinking about to make that engagement easier or more interesting?
Sure. I think there are a bunch of ways that can happen. First of all, engaging people on several levels. So the researcher level, possibly the journalist level, and just members of the public. The timing could not be better for this kind of effort, because we're in the middle of a huge fiscal challenge brought on by recent events, and those events present the grandest of all grand challenges in public administration and in American life. So in that sense, I think the opportunity to engage people is just really strong. To engage the public, I think to engage researchers, I think everybody on this sees the value of it and understands how it can be used. To engage the public, you probably would like to avoid terms like fiscal and intergovernmental and federalism, but that's okay. And I think both of these efforts actually admirably do that, in particular the Treasury one, which really, you can see the user-centered design sort of leaps off the page. And so that's a great thing in terms of accessibility.
That's a really good point. Focusing on the user is always the most powerful way to make a connection.
And it's the hardest thing to do. It takes a lot of work, and it takes work from the beginning of the process. Having been involved in the process of designing and launching websites on a much lower scale than that, I can understand it is a big challenge, and to do it well is impressive.
You specialize in telling stories that make the process of government feel real to constituents. So as you look at this data, what sort of stories would you use fiscal data or federalism to tell these days?
I can give, I think, a couple of different examples. One is to illustrate the sheer size of government and how it affects people's lives. The more people know about where their tax dollars are being spent and what they're being used for, the more likely they are to be not just better informed, but more confident in what government can do. On the more specific level, a couple of things sort of jump out at me. One is the fiscal condition of state and local governments is going to be a huge topic of interest, already is. And what we're seeing already emerge is maybe there was a great deal of concern about the effect of the pandemic on state and local governments. And what we're starting to see is, particularly at the state level, that it's maybe not as bad as some people anticipated, because of things like the Supreme Court decision that allowed states to tax internet purchases. So this may not, exploring the fiscal impact of the pandemic is going to be a very interesting area, and I think an area where these types of sites could really play an important role. And in the same vein, things that are ongoing are going to require a lot of data analysis to determine what the situation is. For instance, the Biden administration, one of its first things was to suspend oil and gas leases on federal lands. This doesn't just affect the federal government. States share in the royalties from those leases, and that's going to have an impact on them. So those kinds of things are stories that I think data sources like this can really help explore.
Yeah, those are great points, and things that really affect people in their day-to-day lives. And so using this kinds of data to really connect that is a powerful story. I want to ask one more question about the value of these stories. There's a lot of conversation about facts and data in our national conversation today, and whose facts and data are correct. Do you think these kinds of sites and the stories around them can help us come to a common understanding of the facts around government operations? And if so, maybe make some progress towards improving trust?
The optimist in me says information and data like this across a range of sources would go a long way toward doing that. The pessimist or realist in me says we've got a bigger problem that we have to solve first. And that is, trust in government is not just an abstract problem anymore. It's literally people storming the US Capitol. So there's base level work that needs to be done to improve people's understanding of data and information sources that are credible and real. And then the second level thing is to have more and more easily accessible sources like this.
Well, we're excited about the opportunity to make a difference using both of these sets of data. I do want to thank you, Tom, for your time on the panel, Amy and Linnea for sharing with us the fiscal data set, and Jamie and John for sharing Federalism US. We really look forward to hearing your feedback, and we're looking forward to both of these growing in the future. So thanks so much for joining us today. We're delighted to have been able to give you this presentation.